It says divide and conquer concept. So the moment we hear about this phrase of divide and conquer concept, perhaps I think all of us, the first thing which comes to our mind is what the Britishers did to India. India prior to Britishers was a very strong country. It has a very rich and a diverse culture. It was a lot of heterogeneity in the population. So that was the power which India had. But when the Britishers came, they took it in a different way. They in fact used this policies of dividing it into smaller states, looking at the weak points of each and every community, and that was how they were able to destroy this great nation. So similarly, I think this same concept is for something which is very powerful and very aggressive tumor, which are the sarcomas. And I feel the way we can conquer the sarcoma could only be possible if we again use the same policies of divide and conquer concept, break it into small pieces, look at a targeted model, and use those targeted model and therapies to conquer this rare and aggressive disease. So now coming to the talk per se. So I have a small question, just to wake up all the colleagues who would be listening to this talk, from the afternoon siesta. The question goes on as follows. Now, we all are aware that metastatic sarcoma, whom we have been giving palliative chemotherapies, generally have a median survival of around 12 to 14 months. Maybe if they're very lucky, they may end up to around 20 months. But there is a particular subgroup of sarcoma which earlier had a median survival of not more than 9 to 10 months. And this was the condition which was way back, previous to 1990. And now this particular subgroup is living so well in present era. We have so good drugs that the median survival is crossed up 5 years. And there is also around 30% of the patients, same subgroup patients, who are living up to 9 years. So what subgroup am I talking about? And really what happened after 1990, which brought about this change? So this was a question which I wanted everybody to answer, but I know it would take a lot of time, so I'll go straight away to the answer. Now, the group of sarcoma which I am talking about is GIST, and we all are aware in our day-to-day practice that we no longer consider GIST to be a very major problem. With so good drugs for GIST coming up, I think it's become a very common thing to use imatinib in GIST patients, and they do wonderfully good. So this was what happened in 1990, when there were only 5 patients, but we were able to find out that they had a mutation in something called KIT. And this KIT mutation actually rendered the tumor to have a constitutionally activated kinases. And that was the main problem. So even among those patients who had KIT mutation, they were further divided into whether they had an exon 11 mutation, exon 9 mutation, or they had a PDGFR alpha D842V exon mutation. And this led to a great change in the management. And with a simple drug like imatinib, which was so easily tolerable, the patient had wonderful outcome. The subgroup of patients which did not respond, we were able to find out that they had a different kind of mutation called exon 9. So they required a higher dose of imatinib. And once they progressed on imatinib, we had sunitinib with us. And presently we have phase 2 trials going on for avapritinib, which actually works on PDGF alpha D842V exon mutations. So this is how the world of sarcoma changed post 1990, and just no longer was considered to be a big problem, but other sarcomas continued to remain a big problem for us. So with this small background, we'll come to the main topic, as in what is sarcoma. So we all are aware that it's a rare disease. Why do we say rare? Because it constitutes only around 1% of all human cancers, but the numbers are definitely much more higher if we are looking in pediatric age group, where it constitutes around 10 to 15%. And sarcomas are kind of disease which can occur at any age. In fact, there has been publication where people have detected intrauterine sarcomas. So even that is a subgroup. And the numbers of subtypes of sarcomas are so huge that there are certain publication which gives you a number of beyond 300. But more or so, it is around 50. Definitely, there would be 50 plus distinct types of sarcoma. And as we know, sarcomas, uh, if detected in an early stage and they are localized, we have a reasonably good outcome. And almost to the tune of 5 year survival is around 81%. But sarcomas most of the times are detected in a advanced stage when they have already metastasized, and there the outcomes, 5 year survival rate is generally very pathetic and to the tune of around 15 to 20%. So if we come to this graph, this graph is something which gets us very worried, because what we see in this graph is that the death rate has been more or less constant from 1992 to 2019. So in an era where we have having advances, in each and every field, having a same death rate, and actually we've had nothing, we have nothing done really great, to improve the death rate among all our cancer, all our sarcoma patients. So this is what has led to a lot of development in the field of sarcoma, and we have now started looking up into the more directed approaches, and probably over some time to come we would have this graph going down, and we would have a better control over the death rates among these patients. Now coming to the estimated new cases, these are all data from US. There's a number around 14,000 of new cases which are detected every year in US. And I believe a similar number, or in fact, in India, we should be having much more number than this. And the percentage of new cancer cases are generally 0.7%. So it's hovering around 1%. 1% in both the incidence and prevalence, and also 1% for all the cancer deaths. So that's the reason why it is so rare. Now, coming to some basic understanding of sarcomas, we all know that mainly the sarcomas by till this time have been divided into the cell of origin and the architectural histopathological changes that each and every subgroups have. So the major chunk of these sarcomas are primarily the bone sarcomas, which constitute around 15 to 20%. Among the bone sarcomas, we have osteosarcoma, chondrosarcoma, Ewing's sarcoma. So these are the major subgroups that we have to handle. And similarly, there is no part of the body which actually doesn't have a sarcoma. So if we look at this picture here, so we can see that we can have a sarcoma which can arise from any fibrous connective tissue, which is fibrosarcoma. We can have a desmoplastic small round cell tumor, which generally have an origin in GI system. You have malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumors. You have leiomyosarcoma, RMSs, osteosarcoma. And the only subgroup where we have been able to achieve something is the gastrointestinal stromal tumors. Rest all, more or less, we are still groping in dark and using our old age principle of surgery and some basic chemotherapies that we have got. So this is a picture which shows the prevalence of sarcoma in India. So this is mainly what we see, that the maximum number of patients are from Maharashtra. But this slide seems to be slightly skewed in its presentation because the data is from TMH. And I think that's the reason why we are seeing maximum number of patients from Maharashtra. So what are the challenges that we are actually facing in our day-to-day management of sarcoma? This is the crux that we will try to have an answer to. So the biggest problem is the misdiagnosis, or what I would say, a diagnosis which many times has a lot of discordant histopathological reports that we get. And so the biggest challenge, the whole challenges starts starts from the basic understanding of the correct diagnosis. That is where we have been faltering for some time. Then the second bigger challenge is, since these patients generally do not have, they are not very symptomatic till they actually have a metastatic disease. So they have a slow growing tumor happening. So by the time they reach a doctor for any kind of management, they generally have a very advanced disease. Another bigger problem is that this group of tumor is highly heterogeneous. So we cannot have one solution for all the types of sarcomas, and they are aggressive in nature. And many a times they do have resistance to the type of treatment that we have. And definitely the problem of discordant histopathological diagnosis, which has been up to the tune of 25%. Like one out of every 4 case, if you have a problem in the diagnosis itself, you can understand the amount of challenges that are being faced in managing this particular group of malignancies. And these discordant histopathologicals are not just the diagnostic problem, but they have their implication also on the treatment. So that is the amount of problem that we have. So over my few next slides, we'll try to answer whatever amount questions that we can answer. So I've started off with the management itself, because this historical perspective is very important for all of us to understand that the first reference of soft tissue tumor have come from Papyrus Ebers in 1500 BC. And it also recommends its treatment with knife if the lesion is small. So you can understand that it took for last almost 3,500 years. It's this knife that we are basing our managing our treatment of sarcomas primarily with. So till for last 3,500 years, surgery remains to be the main gold standard for treatment of sarcomas if they are localized in nature. And we have seen how miserably we have failed over all these years in managing this. So this was the problem that needed to be sorted out. So just to give you a brief idea of how few of the sarcomas actually, how we work up and where on precision medicine is going to help us. So this is a small cartoon and a small diagram. So if you have a suspected bone tumor, we all get an imaging done, we get a biopsy done. Once you get a biopsy done, then there could be bone tumors can actually go into the direction of either an osteosarcoma, or you can suspect a Ewing sarcoma. Once you suspect an osteosarcoma, the basis of histopathological report is the presence of osteoid producing substances, which give us some proof that we are dealing with osteosarcoma. Now, if you're using a precision medicine, you can look for the mutations or inactivating T53 and RB1 mutations, which would give us some idea that whether we are dealing with osteosarcoma only, or is it part of some bigger, syndromic malignancies like Lee-Fraumeni or other bigger disorders. So this is the first step where the precision medicine use of, directed approach towards all these malignancies can give us a better diagnostics in these particular subgroups. Similarly, if you're looking at a Ewing sarcoma, we have an IHC for CD99, but we can also improve our basis of diagnosis on if we have an EWSR1-FL1 fusion gene. So this is the first place where it can be used to have a better diagnosis of the disease. Now, if you have diagnosed, how we all have been managing cases of osteosarcomas are, we give a neoadjuvant therapy for methotrexate, doxorubicin, and cisplatin. Basically, any anthracycline with platinum is being used. If we are lucky enough, we have a localized disease, then we go for a surgery and maybe we give an adjuvant. If it is a metastatic disease, definitely the story is very bad. You can still give 3-drug regime or 2-drug regime. And if it progresses further, what we have is just an ifosfamide and etoposide chemotherapy. So this is all that we had, 2 good lines of chemotherapy, the response to which also was not very, very good. Similarly, if you are looking at Ewing sarcoma, similarly, we have a VAC-IE protocol. If we are lucky, we have a localized disease, you get a surgery and you get an adjuvant. But if the disease progresses, what you got is a cyclophosphamide and topotecan, or perhaps an irinotecan temozolomide based chemotherapies. And all of us are aware the outcomes that we would definitely get with these kind of chemotherapy regimes. So this, though the slide is slightly blurred, but I just want to highlight this point that this is, if you do all the investigation, they have finally divided it into two major subgroups, one of which is special consideration for unique histologies, which take you into the direction of desmoid tumors, Ewing's rhabdomyosarcoma, or maybe an osteosarcoma, where we have some, kind of definite therapy. Otherwise, most of the other sarcomas are clubbed into the basis of either stage 1, stage 2 and 3 resectable, stage 2 and 3 resectable disease with adverse functional outcomes, or you could have a metastatic disease. The idea of this slide is, you see how they have all been clubbed together, and this is an approach which is not helping us anywhere. This is a very age-old approach of using, putting all the fruits in the same bowl kind of approach, which has not been very helpful. So there comes the role of precision oncology. So just this cartoon seems to be a very appropriate cartoon, though the cartoon has been taken for colon cancer, but we will ignore the colon cancer, and we would see how this works. Here's a group of patients, and we have one single therapy for all of these patients. If some of them are lucky, they have got a very good effect. If they're unlucky, they can have no effect. And if they're very, very unlucky, then they will have an adverse effect. So there was no effort made to actually pick and choose which patient would get what kind of therapy. Vis-a-vis, if we see the other group, where we have used a more of a personalized concept and used the basic understanding of precision oncology. So here what we have done, that we have done further studies to demarcate which patient would benefit from a particular type of therapy. And here, as the cartoon shows, that the effect has generally been very brighter in this kind of approach. So this is a very, very simple method of explaining the precision oncology, but I think it does make sense to give us a wider perspective. So this is the fruit bowl hypothesis, which has been used till now in the treatment of cancer, in treatment of sarcomas per se, where we have all the types of sarcomas put into one bowl and given the same sort of therapy. But the future definitely holds on if we can divide each and every subgroup, and we have more targeted approach to each and different types of sarcomas. So this colorful slide, I think all of us had been seeing for quite many years. And the beauty of this slide is the more colorful it is because of the various heterogeneous types and varieties of malignancy of the sarcomas that we are seeing, So as we said, there are more than 50 particular types of subtypes of sarcomas, and it is clearly evident from this colorful pie chart. And this is where, the concept of more molecular diagnostic and with an enhanced understanding of the complex morphological and genetic association of soft tissue sarcomas would be required. And that should be the foundation stone of our further management. So now another beautiful slide. Even, one of the subgroups that we had earlier seen of the liposarcoma, it has been further divided into myxoid liposarcoma, well-differentiated liposarcoma, de-differentiated liposarcoma, sclerosing liposarcoma, round cell liposarcoma. So with these two slides, the whole idea was just to give an impact of what is the diverse nature that we are actually fighting against. So now with this old fruit bowl theory, which has been there for many years, now the sarcomas gradually have shifted towards more precision-based therapy. And now they are divided into sarcomas with specific genetic alterations like chromosomal translocations, point mutation, and simple karyotypes, and sarcomas with non-specific genetic alteration and unbalanced karyotypes. So this is how now the further division of sarcomas is happening. And for example, like we have recurrent chromosomal translocations in clear cell sarcoma, we have EWSR1, ATF1 mutations. In TLS CHOP and myxoid or round cell LPS. So these kind of fusions and mutations are now being used, both for diagnostic and as well as prognostic, like SS18 and SSX1 in synovial sarcoma. This is almost now a diagnostic basis for a diagnosis of synovial sarcoma. Similarly, in RMS, whether you have a PAX3 FOXO mutation or PAX7 FOXO mutation, they further divided. It becomes diagnostic as well as prognostic as to the various types of rhabdomyosarcomas, be it alveolar or embryonal type. So how is this personalizing of the sarcoma treatment happening? So this tumor is making this complex idea a very simple one, where they have used that, okay, suppose you do a tumor biopsy, then you do a 3D cell cultures for these tumors, then you do an NGS, you do the molecular profiling, biomarker identification, and then without basic understanding, you start using these drugs in vitro drug screening. And once we have in vitro drug screening, then you start doing it for the mice. And later on, you can go ahead with various types of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 trials. So this is how this personalized sarcoma treatment is evolving. Similarly, this is doing an NGS-based, whole exome and whole transcriptome analysis. They also gives us a lot of information as to where actually is the defect lying. Like this cycle, of cell division, which moves from G0, G1, S, G2, and M phase. We have various kinds of cyclins which push the movement of cells from either G1 to S phase to G2 phase. So these small cyclins, CDK4/6, ARF, MDM2, P53, PTN, EWS-FL1. Over some time, this complex diagram, actually now we are looking at a targetable drugs at all these small, sub small SIP-KIP models, cyclin B. So all these figures that we are seeing, we are working, some of them are in phase 1 or phase 2 trials, and particular drugs are being used. So the frequency of the common genetic alterations in sarcoma, we all know TP53 is the biggest culprit. And most of this data also show it the same thing, CDKN2AB. Then you have ATRAX, RB1, IDH1, KRAS. So all these various genetic alterations can be detected, but definitely TP53 remains to be the most common one in the sarcomas. Now, the different genetic alterations and the fusion partners. This is a busy slide, but I think very soon this slide would become a day-to-day practice for our management, because these are the translocation which I feel should be done whenever we have diagnostic issues. Like in a desmoplastic round small cell tumor, I think a translocation of 1122p13q12, I think should be done whenever we are in doubt. Similarly, for alveolar RMS, for synovial sarcoma, I think everybody's getting done the X18, SS8, and SX1 fusion genes. Similarly, I think in IMFT, Ewing's, and even in unclassified pleomorphic sarcomas, extraskeletal myxoid chondrosarcomas, I think these are the type of tumors and the translocation which should be included in our day-to-day practice for a better diagnostic understanding and both for prognosis also. Similarly, in activating point mutations, for GIST, we have seen the wonder what understanding of these molecular alterations have brought in about. Similarly, we should be looking at the CTNB1 for desmoid tumors, MPNST, MLPS, you have PIK3 angiosarcomas. Similarly, gene amplifications and tumor suppressor inactivation. I think we need to understand and do more of molecular tumor boards to have a better understanding of this disease, and that would perhaps help us in treating our patients better. So the biggest question is, okay, we had discussed about all these molecular and translocations and fusion. So what are the real, as an oncologist, I am interested in what is the drug that I can give to my patient, So this slide gives you a very good idea of if you're dealing with angiosarcoma and you have an alteration with ROS1, so there are phase 1 trial for ALK-ROS and NTRK inhibitors. So I have something to look forward if I have exhausted my initial resources. If I have chondrosarcoma and there is a PTEN, I can think about everolimus and sorafenib. Similarly, in chondrosarcomas, we have IDH1 inhibitors. The IDH1 inhibitors definitely are coming up in a very big way. Similarly, in clear cell sarcomas, if you have a BRAF mutation, you have vemurafenib for it. In giant cell tumors of soft part, till this time, the only idea we had of use of CDK4/6 inhibitors were in breast. But now here we have, if you have a CDKN2AB loss, then we can give a palbociclib. Though the phase 2, phase 3 trials are still happening, but definitely we have got something. In Kaposi sarcoma, the use of pembrolizumab in cases if you have a good TMB. In leiomyosarcoma, again, we can look at CDKN2A and B loss and have something in our kitty in the form of palbociclib and fulvestrant. Leiomyosarcoma, pazopanib, we had been using pazopanib very commonly in sarcomas, but definitely if we would have documented an FGFR amplification and then used it, maybe we would have had a better understanding. Similarly, in osteosarcoma, if there is a PTEN loss, you can use sirolimus. So synovial sarcoma is definitely and other sarcomas. The list is endless. Each and every sarcomas has been having a lot of mutation, and most of them are undergoing some kind of phase 1, phase 2 trials. So this is a very good cartoon, and trust me, the numbers and the drugs which have been given here are very less compared to actually the amount of trials which are happening. So this is a good cartoon which shows the various pillars of oncogenesis. You have angiogenesis, so you have a drug against the angiogenesis part of it. Anti-angiogenic agent, we can be pazopanib, sunitinib, sorafenib. Similarly, for cell cycle progression, we have already seen we can have CDK4/6 inhibitors, whole group of CDK4/6 inhibitors and MDM2 inhibitors. Similarly, for sustained proliferative signaling, we can have all these MET inhibitors. You have KIT PDGFR inhibitors, a lot of mTOR inhibitors. Similarly, olaparib hasn't stayed behind. Even olaparib and PARP inhibitors have come up in soft tissue sarcomas. Similarly, your all HDAC inhibitors, they are also been, which actually work up in the epigenetic levels of malignancies, have been used. Similarly, IOs have also come up, and here also another beautiful diagram which shows all the various targetable things that we can be using. We can have anti-VEGF and anti-IGFR bodies. You have PDGFR, c-KIT mutation inhibitors. Then you have CDK inhibitors. So HDAC inhibitors, MDM2 inhibitors, PI3AKT inhibitors. So the number of drugs which are actually under trial are phenomenal, and the way forward is that we should be getting more understanding of these sarcomas, so that at least at this point of time we can have something up our sleeves. Similarly, the world is moving towards doing more and more NGSs and in sarcomas, and there have been multiple articles floating around. So this is a very important article which actually shows that how the NGS can be used in our diagnostic modalities and help us. Similarly, there are a lot of genomic alterations which have been reported all over the world, and there are various trials. These trials have shown that almost around to the tune of 40 to 50% 40 to 50% of the cases can have some kind of genomic alteration, and which can actually help us in changing our treatment protocols. So similarly, we have been using NGSs for both bone and soft tissue sarcoma, and the outcomes are that most bones and soft tissue sarcomas harbor at least one genetic alteration, and it appears sizable number of the tumors contain mutations that are clinically actionable. By clinically actionable, we mean that a particular kind of mutation can help us either in diagnosis or in the management. So even having one clinically actionable mutation with each sarcomas, I think that would be a great success. Similarly, this has helped us in detecting a lot of NTRK gene fusions. And as we know, NTRK inhibitors have come up and they are being used in other malignancies. So similarly, if we have these kind of fusion which are driver mutation in these kind of sarcomas, then we can definitely use NTRK inhibitors. And integrating NTRK testing into the management of patients with sarcoma, could be a way forward. And this can all be done if we use more NGS-based diagnostic modalities. And this last slide is something which would make everyone happy. The global sarcoma drug market has been increasing, and it would increase very phenomenally. So this is the time where newer diagnostic modalities, no more money gonna be pumped up into this management of sarcomas. And perhaps that would help us, would help us in newer modalities of even diagnosis and newer drugs coming up. And at the end, it would benefit to the patients who will have a better quality and a better overall survival. So this is how the future of medicine is changing, and genomic technologies are increasingly large part of the evolution of modern medicine, and understanding of genomic implication is definitely growing, and the speed of the diagnosis is also increasing, and the informatics advances are making more discoveries and connections at an enormous pace. And so by, I think, 2025, we can see these curves rising, and there will be more of precision care, precision-based, and a personalized care in oncology. So with this, I would like to thank you and thank everybody for the patient hearing. The dais is, I think Dr. Vidya can take over.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for this wonderful session, sir. Very educating and very informative session. We have one question. What is the clinical experience on immunotherapy in sarcoma patients?
Okay, so definitely the amount of immunotherapy which is actually being used in other malignancies, compared to that, I think sarcomas are still lagging behind, because here the basis is primarily more on the TMBs. And TMBs, as we have already discussed, that not all sarcomas are same. We can look at a particular group of sarcomas like liposarcomas, and in that particular subgroup of, if you have a high TMB, there is where the role of immunotherapy has started coming up. There is phase 3 data also coming up, but if you ask a definite question, which particular sarcoma, when you can give an immunotherapy, nobody has an answer as of now. Each and every sarcomas, the heterogeneity is so much that you have to take it as we had discussed. Each particular sarcoma, we have to get the NGS, look at the TMB, and then decide on whether we can give an immunotherapy, or do we have better drugs than immunotherapy. Immunotherapy might not be an answer to that particular subgroup. So this is where the understanding needs to be done. Yeah.
Okay. So, sir, another question from my side. Osteosarcoma seems to be such a, we do find biomarkers in osteosarcoma,
Okay.
unlike like Ewing's or synovial or where we or any other small round cell tumor which is driven by a translocation. Osteosarcoma is something which is clueless.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is the most abundant type of sarcoma.
Yeah, so a very good observation, ma'am. But you see, the advantage of osteosarcoma is, if on histopathology you're able to see an osteoid, you actually do not require anything further. Whatever other tests that we are doing whether TP53 or other mutations that are more of prognostic, but the diagnostic dilemma in osteosarcoma is primarily less. First of all, you have a good imaging method. The tumor is coming from bone, be it from metaphysis or epiphysis. This gives you some clinical indication. And histopathology, if you have seen an osteoid producing malignant cell, then the diagnosis is very clear. Perhaps the use of precision medicine could come in, second line or third line. In fact, the molecular profiling of osteosarcoma in itself is a very huge topic. But whether we have been able, I think there would be very soon we would have more targetable thing for osteosarcoma also. But since these are the tumors who respond well to chemotherapy, we are lucky enough that if these are young patients first of all, and you can give them a 3 MAP or either methotrexate, and you're giving a anthracycline and a taxane based therapy. So these and in majority of the cases, we see that the tumor vanishes to the tune of more than 90% just by giving a new adjuvant therapy. And then added to it is you have an adjuvant therapy and also an RT, radiation. So we are quite lucky as far as osteosarcoma goes. In case if it is not metastasized, if it is a local osteosarcoma, we have reasonably good option of curing that disease. But the moment it becomes metastatic, trust me, you can't give 3 drugs. If the patient has a poor performance status, that is the time we have to do more into the molecular profiling and perhaps find out better drugs, which the patient can tolerate and have a better overall survival.
And Ewing's, it recurs within 2 years.
Yeah. So Ewing's also, like we have right now treated Ewing's from a 7-month-old child to generally around 20 years of old child. So Ewing's, the problem with Ewing's is to give, we give 3-drug regime and that to 17 cycles. So for that is biggest problem, the duration of the chemotherapy that is supposed to be given. So similarly, I think the developments in these 2 bone tumors would actually help us a lot, and the exposure to the amount of chemotherapy that we have to give to these patients. The cytotoxic chemotherapy in both these diseases, is the quantity is quite huge. So the help which we can get from these precision medicine would be that maybe in second line we have some kind of targetable thing, some maybe an mTOR inhibitors or something which can at least take care and keep the disease in a stable condition.
So, but at the upfront, it's going to be, it will take a long time.
It will take a long time. Yeah, because these are chemo-responsive tumors. We have an advantage here. These are not unresponsive tumors. And that's the reason why we still have good outcomes with these diseases,
So there is one more question here. What is the common misdiagnosis challenge you come across in your practice? This is a pathologist question. Probably a pathologist.
So trust me, whenever I get this report of undifferentiated sarcoma, that is the time you just don't know what to do. So that's the biggest challenge that we do face, because then we are left nowhere, Then we just club it into the same fruit ball concept, and okay, then we go with the idea whether we can resect it or we cannot resect it. If we can resect it, if there is a positive margin, then we give an RT, and then we just hope that the chemotherapy which I am giving would be functional, that is just hope on which I am giving my therapy. But we are not very much sure as to the amount of advantage which I am going to get with it. So that is particular subset where, you actually are very worried.
And apart from GIST, what are the other sarcomas where the treatment is very promising today?
Like I told you, this osteosarcoma treatment is very promising. Even with now newer drugs coming up, liposarcomas, they also respond very well. If the issue there is also whether they can tolerate the chemo or not. That is the bigger problem, because the commonest place of metastasis in sarcomas are lung. And if they have gone to lung, then the entire performance status goes for a 6. And once your performance status is not good, you're never convinced to give 2 or 3 cytotoxic chemotherapies. Then generally what happens is you try to give them pazopanib. And if you ask me, that is a drug which has saved most of the lives and at least led to a lot of stable disease in most of my patients. And that's an oral drug, whether it's a COVID or no COVID, they can have, pazopanib at their home. So this has actually helped us a lot.
So when osteosarcoma does not respond to the normal MAP regimen, do you think NGS will play a role?
should play a role. I am yet to use an NGS in a non-responding osteosarcoma, but I definitely feel there is definitely a role, because we don't have much. If you have used methotrexate, doxorubicin, and platinum, you have given everything. And it does happen, many times when you give, you see, if you look at a course of management of osteosarcoma, what is done is you give a new adjuvant therapy, and then you do a surgery. Then you look at the amount of necrosis which has happened to the tumor. So if it is less than 90%, then what we generally feel is that the previous chemotherapy is not working. But it's easier said than done, but you don't have much things beyond that. You have already exhausted your best drugs. So though we do change, we based on irinotecan based therapy, we do go for that, but that disease is really, really bad disease. So one should be doing an NGS, in particular that subset of osteosarcoma. Yes.
Just like a high grade serous ovarian, which is a platinum sensitive, and then it relapses. Similar situation,
Yes,
not an exact corroboration.
Not exactly. Yeah. Definitely. Because their platinum is the whole soul. Here, your methotrexate was the most important backbone. So yeah.
Then in that case, something like a second line targeted therapy should come up. Then probably it will help.
Because trust me, whatever you may do, a disease which has not responded to your neoadjuvant MAP based therapy will definitely not respond to your second line. So, and even if it's response, it would just be a matter of time that it comes back with a vengeance. So you have to be, that is the time we should be doing it. I think not doing an NGS at that particular time in present world, and somebody who can afford, I think that would be criminal. Yeah.
There is one more question, sir. There is a case where they have seen CDK4 and MDM2 amplification in a dedifferentiated liposarcoma.
Okay.
Which are considered as diagnostic markers. So for such a patient, would you give CDK4 inhibitors or nutlins?
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
Or you go with a conventional therapy, although there is a CDK4 amplification.
Correct. This is a very nice question. The science moves, in a very fast way, but the practice changing doesn't move so fast. Now, this particular patient, if I have exhausted maybe my first line or second line, and many times just prior to us writing that the patient goes for a best supportive care, we do try to find out if there's anything we can help this patient out. Though I have never given till now, but suppose tomorrow I see this patient and I'm just sending the patient for best supportive care, definitely I will try. I'll try.
Before going for a best supportive care,
I'll definitely try. And we have done, in fact, what I was trying to tell you, that this hilar cholangiocarcinoma whom we are giving trastuzumab, there are times when you feel that you want more, you require something that you want to target. So I think and it's just a matter of time. Very soon we will be using more and more precision-based treatment in sarcomas. Yes, there is no way apart from that.
So so the next question is exactly related to the answer just you gave. What is your experience in managing sarcomas using off-label therapies, and how was the results? And
so definitely I have used anti-HER2 therapy in sarcomas. That I would say would be an off-label thing. But apart from that, I haven't, if you call these things, but I don't think you can call pazopanib or sunitinib or imatinib in present day off-label. I think they're very much on-label. So I think the only thing I would say is anti-HER2 was something which I would have used off-label. Yeah.
But it works, sir, when there is a molecular.
I have given 3 cycles. The patient is reasonably okay, but we are yet to scan him again. So, but I think he should have, if not responded, at least have had a stable disease. Yeah.
So another similar question, more of a clinical trial related. Are doctors in India open to try the drugs that are validated in vitro level with good efficacy? or it has been preferred, or it should be always an FDA NCCN approval?
No. I think uh, the present day oncologist, everyone is trying, we all try to understand the biology of the disease. Like at this point of time, I'm doing a trial of low dose atezolizumab in GB. We are using 1 milligram per kg. So the idea of 1 milligram per kg was from the pharmacokinetic studies. The normal dose is 1200 milligram, but we are giving only 60 milligram. So the amount that we have reduced is, minuscule. But we all are doing our trials, and the every time we go back to those basic science, what were the outcomes in the in vitro study? Because this is a drug which is very expensive. Suppose if I can cut it down to 1/20th of its rate and still get some reasonable good outcomes, that too in a patient who actually had lost all its hope. I think everybody is doing his bit, and we all tend to go back to basic science, understand the pharmacokinetics, pharmacogenomics, and then try to pick up things here and there and do our own kind of trials. So it is happening. Yeah.
There's just one more question, sir. Any experience in NGS with undifferentiated pleomorphic sarcomas?
I have got it done, but if you ask me offhand, I think what I did at this patient was still in the first line itself. So I think we have gone ahead with the standard of care. Maybe that report we will require it once he relapses or something. But we did get it done. But change of treatment because of an NGS report, I could tell you, was only with anti-HER2 which I tried. Yeah.
Okay. So they are also asking from our lab side also, like, have you come across undifferentiated sarcomas where you found actionable targets?
Yeah, I could have come better prepared, but offhand, if you ask me which target, those are very huge reports. So what happens is, you remember those things, like suppose if those of few of my patients, once they come with a relapse setting, that is the time when I go into the detail of the NGS report. But since first line, more or less, you are very much sure. So definitely we have got it done, but maybe next time I can tell you the exact actionable mutations.
We found once a BRAF mutation, sir.
Okay.
V600E mutation in an undifferentiated sarcoma.
Yeah. So suppose if this patient comes to me, I would be more than willing to treat him with vemurafenib. Yeah. So I don't think I have any inhibitions, because in other settings, wherever we have an actionable mutations, they have done phenomenally well. So I personally feel maybe even after first line, if there would be slightest doubt of any progressive disease, I would like to give that patient.
Sir, another thing, between vemurafenib and dabrafenib plus trametinib, do we go on, is there any organ specific reservation? Like melanoma, vemurafenib, dabrafenib plus trametinib for lung, or I don't want to try vemurafenib with lung. In that way, for anything on the sarcoma side?
I think we have used like darbepoetin and trametinib for melanoma. I have an experience of 3 or 4 patients which I have used. Vemurafenib, only vemurafenib, I have not yet used. We get this combination of darbepoetin and trametinib. So that is what I have an experience. The biggest problem that we do face with that is it causes hyperpyrexia, So that is where we get stuck. You don't know if this hyperpyrexia is because of the disease, the infection, or just a drug, So that is a challenging thing which we have faced. But if you ask me organ specific differentiation, that I'm not aware of, that we have anything like that.
Okay, sir. So I think we have completed all the questions in the question answer session, as well as from the chat window, sir. So
good.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time and this wonderful session. I really enjoyed discussing, and thanks for sharing your experience also. There were many medical oncologists who are there in this webinar right now, listening to you from different parts of the Southeast Asia. And I thank you from all their behalf for this wonderful session, sir.
Okay.
And
Thank you. Thank you.
I also would like to thank all the attendees here for taking their time off on a Saturday evening to be here for this wonderful session on sarcoma and where we are with the precision oncology in sarcoma. I think there is a lot more to be done, and we are just beginning, and we should do more and more profiling. And we from Forbase Care, we'll try our level best to bring down the cost of NGS as much as possible, so that every patient of sarcoma gets profiled, with whatever they can. And then probably understanding the biology would really help you in taking decisions even at first line. Never know. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you all once again, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.